I was debating if I'll do one on the JFK document release, but it's interesting in the sense of we kind of see somewhat of how the public and how media present things. Oh, maybe I'll title this the JFK Files, something like that. Possibly be just a talk about it. Over the years, like a lot of people, I've saw various documentaries. Oliver Stone made the famous movie JFK and brought many scenarios out. The big little section of all the files that were released on JFK, the big one, some were held back, but the big one would be the initial autopsy, official now, this is not a conspiracy. The initial autopsy showed and said and stated that JFK was shot from the front as well as from behind. And then there was also a section in the documents, I'll link them to this, that had somebody that actually was speaking about it and pretty much, not so much a conspiracy, but talked about two shooters. Okay. That should have been the bombshell. So I'm going to the various news sites just to focus in on that one particular thing. Some came up from The Guardian, and I'm Googling, of course, the most recent, what was the most important thing that the public learned. And the Guardian one, it said, and all the conspiracy theorists about the two shooters, about JFK being shot from the front. And as I'm reading it, they wrote that the day before the document release. But yet on Google, that's like one of the big... So it's not a conspiracy for those who have stated for a very long time that they felt like one of the cover-ups was there was indeed a second shooter. And if you have an initial autopsy, look, when you do an autopsy on an assassinated president, you don't make mistakes unless later you try to change that. And of all the various documentaries I've seen over the years, there were some that purported to have actual initial photos of John F. Kennedy and how the back of his head was shown blown off. And then in some of those documentaries, they said later, they showed the later photos, meaning they felt like, which showed like hair, meaning they were different. All of these types of things over the years have led people to say there was indeed a second shooter, whether from a bridge, from the grassy knoll. And that would be the big evidence that the initial autopsy said he definitely was shot from the front as well as from behind. The other questions, there were many documentaries and things brought out over the years, but others said that there was a clear bullet hole in the front of the windshield, and the impact from that was not one of the bullets that came from behind, but it definitely was from the front. I didn't look at all the pictures of it, but others that have really followed this for years, there was even a documentary that came out showing the famous, what we call the Zapruder film, and they said there was one in one of those documentaries where you could see it if you went frame by frame, those that investigated stuff deeply on it. And then later, that one section of like a 7-series documentary, they finally pulled that particular. So I would say it, but it's funny as I looked at all the coverage. The coverage basically talks about the conspiracies. I guess the initial autopsy was a conspiracy. The other interesting thing that I was not aware of, because I'm not a deep studier of the JFK, but the initial, what we call the Warren Commission, which was the official investigation of the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963, the Warren Commission report stated emphatically there was one shooter, which was Oswald. I didn't realize that the House did their own, Congress did their own investigation some years later, I guess in the 1980s, and their official investigation had new evidence at that time. Of course, they were privy to all these other documents, but their official investigation actually said at the end of it, there was more than likely a second shooter. Now, that came from Congress, I guess, in the 80s. I was not aware of that. And then the articles are all basically trying to debunk anything else except for the official one-shooter theory. And that article said that there was some other radio. A police officer had his mic that day, accidentally, it was stuck in the on position, meaning there were recordings that they didn't previously have. And when Congress in the 80s said there probably was more than one, it was because of that particular microphone from that officer that later they listened to and analyzed and said you could hear other shots that were coming not from this Oswald school book depository, they were coming from another area. Okay. And then as I read that article, it said, but later that was debunked. Okay, how did they debunk it? They said, well, they had analysts come in, and these analysts listened to all of it, and all the analysts basically said, yes, there was something else. It sounded like bullets, but it probably wasn't. That's how you debunked it. Even though the bombshell should have been the official autopsy said he was shot also from the front, JFK. And so why go down all the rabbit trails? But it was really more of me reading the different narratives. How even The Guardian put out an entire article debunking all the conspiracies, and that came out a day before the document release. And that comes up on Google. I'm not big into the whole JFK thing, but it sure seems as if there were other things that over the years when I did watch various things, people testified that worked for one of the other things they said, they had to change the windshield. The official windshield that is supposedly the original car that Kennedy was in. Supposedly people that worked at that place, they went and found it back in the day when they investigated. They said, no, they changed it out and all. But the biggest evidence is the official autopsy. That's it. I was reading a little bit on Descartes, or starting to, because I'm going to pick up on the philosophy post on Descartes. And so that would have been like maybe the next little teaching I'd do. And any local news updates or anything, I might just post this right away. But I didn't see anything particular. I haven't been, hitting the D. Boy Lister case, though I've spoken about it, the black man who was killed by an officer here in Corpus. But I did notice that some of the media mentioned the other day, why have you not released the video to the public? I don't think the video of that shooting is going to be real significant because Chief Markle did show it to the media and all, but they don't want to release it yet. But the response from the chief, which was honest, the chief basically said, but we're still waiting for, everything to be resolved. Meaning, I'm assuming that would mean the DA, Mark Gonzalez, is still looking at it and hasn't. Because if the DA came out already and made a decision and said, we cleared the officer and, it's done. Of course, I haven't heard that yet. So it's possible Mark Gonzalez is looking at it. And when we do Descartes is one of the, I was going to pick up on the philosophy teaching, but Descartes was famous for, I forget now how to say it, kind of particular words, ergum, cogito, some ergum or something, meaning I think, therefore I am. Descartes lived in the 1500s, and in the 1600s, He was trained by the Jesuits, which were the Catholic intellectuals of the Catholic Church, who were also had a lot of breakthroughs in science and all. But the question at that time in the field of philosophy, math, a lot of them were mathematicians. I talked about that before. And the whole upheaval of what took place in the 1500s, what we refer to as the Protestant Reformation, that caused a questioning in the public. For a long time, the average public, and I'm not saying it was right, but they just felt like people didn't really challenge official truth. And what happened at the time of the Protestant Reformation, there was a real breaking away, rightfully, because people wanted to get back to Scripture and the whole history of the Reformation. But that caused an uneasiness in society in general. Right, I'm talking about JFK, and Edgar Hoover actually said, it's important that the public believes that there was only one person involved. That's also something that came out. Because when the public begins to question, that also causes an uneasiness. And because of the time of Descartes, the philosophers and thinkers were then challenging. How do we know truth? We call that epistemology. But Descartes was, I think, therefore I am. That's the famous quote from Descartes. I think, therefore I am. They began saying, okay, we're going to challenge all of our presuppositions on things that we have learned, because people were questioning, how do we know who to believe now? For many centuries, with the official word of the church, we didn't challenge it, and then a lot of people began challenging that, and we had the breakaway. And so Descartes becomes famous, and for other reasons, but that's a big one. He began saying, first of all, let's see, how do we know and believe certain things? And then he said, is there one thing I know for sure, no matter what? He said, I know one thing, I'm doubting. I can doubt something, meaning I can question something, and how we come to an awareness of what truth is. And he said, and if I doubt, therefore, that's something that means it's true. I've come to that discernment that if I'm doubting, then therefore we can start with that foundation, really, of questioning things. And that's how he arrived at, I think, therefore I am. So this will be a little primer to when we get to Descartes, René Descartes. There's a lot of, we're going to finish our teaching on. One of the things I noticed, I have some friends that have had pasts, and a lot of their pasts have been violent, but they've progressed. They've progressed. And maybe they would still be prone to violence in certain situations. But there are also people that get out of prison and they look for trouble. Their identity was they were tough. And maybe they were, and I hear other people on the street. And then you could see maybe they did a lot of time, and now that they're out, there's no maturity like some of my other friends, where this is a person that I've never mentioned, no, you've never seen before. And some of the little scenarios I get into, there were times where people are looking for trouble, and when I'm in those scenarios, I avoid that as much as I can. I don't walk away. But then when I could see they got to a certain point, and then, but I would not push it, but I would not back off either in the sense of, and so there's a new person in a few, and I thought, and of course I'm the type, if I ever had to, I would fight. but his identity is in that. So even if you were able to win, some of them have, not all of them, but some of them, that's all they're living for. That's their identity. Instead of being out of prison thinking, now I have another chance to move forward, they're just looking for that. And I hear a lot of stories. It's not that I'm afraid, I realize they're still in the high school mentality. So this will be just a little, maybe I'll post it. If I post it right now, I might just try to add some of the links to the JFK thing. If I tag this to maybe like the next teaching post, I'll just add the important ones. And I found it funny how you didn't have to, out of all the document releases, you didn't have to do a conspiracy. They said that's a big one. The initial autopsy, which is not like a mistaken autopsy, but later they would change certain things. The initial one basically did indeed say Mr. Kennedy, President Kennedy, was shot from the front. Okay? So that should have been really maybe the big story out of everything, instead of going to conspiracy. And I was surprised to learn that the House, Congress actually, when they reinvestigated it, they mentioned, they said yes, more than likely there was a second shooter. And then the article said, but that was debunked. Because, well, yes, we looked at the never mind debunking it, the official coroner report was he was shot from the front. We know that. Okay? It's good to question things, all right? Descartes was good. JFK and Descartes.